the shootout with Ian Carroll, Nurse Dean tended to Cox's wounds. Cox didn't waste time recuperating. Within a day of being shot, he returned to his regular morning jog, again in plain sight. In Melbourne, Russell Cox was able to blend in. People saw him jogging the streets, yet they had no idea the person they were looking at was Australia's most wanted man.
Just a cappuccino, thanks, Macca.
What?
Cappuccino, thanks, man.
Okay, Jimmy. What about this Cox bloke, eh?
Who's that?
You haven't heard? Russell Cox, the mad dog. Coppers haven't got a clue. He's been running now for 7 years. Ever since he escaped from that slammer in Sydney.
No, I don't know, Macca. What's slammer?
To Kingle in Sydney. They build this jail that you can't break out of, and he breaks out. Unbelievable.
How'd he do it?
Well, nobody knows. But he did it. 3 years it was open, and they closed it down. He's been on the run now for 7 years.
Well, maybe he just got lucky.
It's not about luck, Jimmy. This bloke's good. He's a master of disguise. So they say here. He could be right under the copper's nose and they wouldn't know.
Yeah, well, some of those coppers aren't too bright.
That's true. Most coppers wouldn't know if a tram was up their arse until a passenger rang the bell. Huh? You know, he must be pretty fit, huh? It says here he ran for 4 miles. The coppers didn't even get close.
Maybe he's a jogger.
You reckon you'll give him a run for his money, eh, Jimmy? Yeah, perhaps it's a good thing they didn't catch him. This bloke would do anything if he was cornered. He's not the sort of bloke to be worried about giving the coppers a bit of curry. Never cornered a mad dog.
Yeah. I best push off. How much for the coffee?
Don't worry about it. On the house.
Cheers, Macca. Must be my lucky day.
Despite being wanted by the police in at least 3 states, Cox has described his life on the run as being relatively normal. He's in a stable relationship. He's in some-time employment. He's also robbing banks. But it was only those times when he was conscious of police being in the street or he thought he was perhaps being followed that he was brought back to the reality that he was a fugitive, a dangerous man on the run.
It's very hard to be a successful criminal if you have a strong sense of dread. I think that one of the premier requirements to be a successful criminal is not to feel anxiety. I mean, I think that's one of the classic kinds of diagnostic symptoms, that people who are successful in crime who are antisocial actually have an absence of anxiety. So I don't see that is unsurprising. It would have been more surprising had he experienced dread than if he hadn't.
No one would be able to live for 11 years being constantly on edge like that. It makes a certain amount of sense that he was able to feel relatively relaxed a lot of the time that he was on the run.
Cheers, Macca. Must be my lucky day.
While the type of life Cox led while on the run seems difficult to fathom, he seems to have chosen a path that was as close to a normal, everyday life as was possible.
Well, why wouldn't you want to have a normal life? I mean, that's all part and parcel of the disguise issue as well. You have a normal life, but you know deep down who you are. That's all part of the game. He would have accepted a whole range of other behaviours as being okay for him. So he'd have an intuitive sense of what normal people did, but he would also know that he was quite different because he was antisocial and good at it.
That said, Cox was obviously always ready to react if he thought he had been recognised and faced arrest.
The killing of Ian Carroll shook Cox and Dean to the core. Their hideout was no longer safe, and they found themselves living off their wits. With money running out, Cox undertook riskier robberies and associated with criminals he would have normally avoided. When we return, Australia's most wanted man for 11 long years finally returns to jail.
Oh, I swear I've never introduced myself to anyone as the Fox. It's what other people call me.
It's a cool nickname, but...
Yeah.
Welcome back to Tough Nuts, Australia's hardest criminals, and Russell Cox, Australia's most wanted man. In 1988, his luck finally ran out. He was arrested in a shootout with police in the car park of Doncaster Shopping Town, a shopping centre in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. Cox was in the company of Raymond Denning, a violent armed robber and a fellow prison escapee. A security guard had noticed the two men sitting in their car, behaving suspiciously. A huge payroll delivery was due, and Cox and Denning had planned to take it at gunpoint. The police were called and arrived in force. Denning jumped from the vehicle with his hands up, but Cox would not go so quietly. He attempted to flee and drove his car directly at police. Police fired at the vehicle and peppered it with full-bore shot. Cox crashed his car. At first, the police had no idea they had captured Australia's most wanted man. As Cox got out of the car at gunpoint, he told police, "You blokes won't believe who you've caught today." The police couldn't believe their luck. They took Cox back to the police station and even had photographs taken with him, with their arms around him. For the first time in 11 years, Russell Cox was back in custody.
The two prize catchers, criminals Cox and Denning, were taken into custody just before 2 o'clock this afternoon. Police had responded to a tip that people wearing balaclavas had been seen in two cars that were following an armoured cash delivery van. They intercepted Denning's car and found two sawn-off .22 rifles and balaclavas. But Cox, after seeing the police, tried to escape through the car park. A policeman armed with a shotgun fired 3 shots at Cox's car, shattering the windscreen and hitting the door and boot. Cox then lost control of the car, colliding with a brick wall. It was only after Cox was taken to CIB headquarters that police realised the significance of the arrest.
Russell Cox had been on the run for 10 years, 8 months, 19 days, without anyone being able to track him down. Ray Denning did it in a week.
Detective Sergeant Ron Pickering, who arrested Snitzeling, said part of the prosecution case would involve evidence from Raymond John Denning. The court was told Denning had sought and been given an indemnity against prosecution for crimes he committed in Queensland in return for evidence he would give in this case.
There have been claims that Denning's escape from Goulburn prison had been allowed by authorities in the hope that Denning would lead them to Cox. Police refute this and acknowledge that Cox's recapture in Melbourne was a fluke.
Some people will tell you that they're almost relieved when they get caught because that gives them the opportunity to make a change that they can't make otherwise. One of the things that often happens, though, is as you get older, you lose the fire. You get tired of all the running around. You burn out of those risk-taking, sensation-seeking kinds of behaviours. The other thing about it, which might be also important for someone such as he, is that he has a long-term committed relationship that he might want to sustain, and some recognition that it's hard to sustain that if he's always in jail.
Russell Cox was charged with a string of armed robberies, but he was acquitted on the murder of Ian Carroll after a Melbourne magistrate ruled that it was not clear who shot first. His partner Helen Dean went to prison for 6 months after being caught outside the courtroom with a pen gun in her handbag. Cox served time for many of his armed robberies, first in Victoria, then Queensland, and finally in New South Wales. In all, Cox would serve 16 more years in prison. In jail, the former escapologist became a model prisoner and actively mentored young offenders. Russell Cox did not want these young men to follow his path.
G'day, Russell Cox.
Yeah, I know what your name is.
What's yours?
Jacob.
That's all?
Yeah, I don't have a nickname.
Nickname?
Yeah, I don't have one yet, but I want one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Have a seat, Jacob. Why do you want a nickname?
Well, you know, you're the Fox, right? Everyone knows you're the Fox. People know who you are.
You reckon?
Yeah.
I've never called myself the Fox.
Bull.
I swear I've never introduced myself to anyone as the Fox. It's what other people call me.
Yeah, it's a cool nickname, but...
Yeah?
Yeah. You know, like, you're cunning, you're smart. Everyone respects you.
Thanks, mate. Hey, you want a cup of tea?
Nah.
How old are you, mate?
19.
How old do you reckon I am?
About 50 or something?
Close enough. You know, when they first put me in here, you were busy growing your first set of teeth. So how smart and cunning am I?
Yeah, but, I mean, people respect you.
Not everyone. Only the fuckwits in here. There's not a lot of competition. Do you want to die in jail?
From Cox's arrest in 1988 until his eventual parole in 2004, he appears to have been the classic model prisoner. He's decided that he's going to have to do this time. Cox would have been respected regardless by fellow inmates, but he seems to have used that notoriety to try to convince younger prisoners that there was no future in pursuing a life of crime and that there was no point spending your life in jail.
In making its decision, the parole board heard evidence that Russell Cox had been a keen participant in prison programs to deter young offenders from a life of crime. According to the board, in the case of the inmate Russell Cox, there is powerful evidence that he is intent on leading a normal, lawful community life.
Paying back is the phrase used. He's paying back, he's giving back, so that there is some kind of meaningfulness to what he's done in the past, that he can give back to the community that will prevent or make better some of the things that he has done.
You know, when they first put me in here, you were busy growing your first set of teeth. So how smart and cunning am I?
I think it's a fantastic result that Cox was able to be educated and find a compassion, particularly through the youth program. And that indicates to me that he was not the sociopath that could not have empathy with anybody else, but that once he finally had nowhere else to go, that he could relate to people, that he could live a life where he followed society's expectations, and indeed, to his credit, I believe he's doing that.
Blokes like that, in my view, if they're given opportunities, are going to be able to make something of themselves. I don't think I know anyone that really wants a life where you're constantly you're looking over your shoulder, wondering whether you're going to be alive in 5 minutes' time. It's a dog's life, you know. And I couldn't see that Cox wouldn't make something of himself.
Even the guard that Russell Cox had held at gunpoint during his failed attempt to escape from Long Bay Prison in 1975 believed Cox had served his time.
As a prison officer, Stephen Tandy knows what it's like to have a gun pointed at his face by an inmate desperate to escape. But that hasn't stopped him pushing for the release of the man who did just that to him more than 25 years ago.
He's been what's termed as a model prisoner. He's never been a management problem. I think he's a much more mature person, a much wiser person.
Authorities say Cox will move to Queensland to work as a builder's labourer and cleaner. They say he will be watched closely.
On the 8th of December 2004, Russell Cox was released from prison. The escapologist had done his time. Amazingly, Cox could not be convicted of his masterpiece, his escape from Cotingal. The authorities had lost his prison file, and when it was first built, the New South Wales government had not taken the proper steps to establish the legal status of Cotingal as a prison. A judge ruled that Cox could not have escaped from a jail that did not legally exist. It was the perfect epilogue to the story of Russell Cox, one-time tough nut and now a reformed man. Cox and the love of his life, Helen Dean, married during his long stretch in prison. They remain together to this day. See you next time on Tough Nuts, Australia's hardest criminals.